The Falcons kicked off their coaching interviews with Ravens defensive coordinator Mike MacDonald. Is he the next coaching prodigy?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at FalcFans.com, still going on this illustrious podcast. And we appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer that tunes in as this podcast is your first watch or first listen each and every day. And to become an everydayer in this wonderful year of 2024, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we're going to talk about a wide-ranging amount of topics. We're going to kind of lay the foundation for what the Falcons might do with their top draft selection, whether that's taking quarterback, maybe a pass rusher. We'll talk about how coveted this Falcons job should be compared to other ones in the sort of timeline for when we might get a hire later this month or maybe at the beginning of February. But we're going to start off talking about one of the candidates, the first candidate for the Falcons that interviewed over this past weekend on Friday, which was Ravens defensive coordinator Mike MacDonald. And, you know, the way I think you can kind of think about Mike MacDonald is maybe he's the Sean McVay of defense, meaning that he's that shining, ascending star, that young, brilliant defensive mind, how McVay was that for offense 7 years ago when he got the job in LA. Maybe McDonald's that guy, you know, that people are going to be looking back 7 years from now being like, man, that guy was, you know, how did we not hire that guy? So, you know, I think with McDonald, you look at sort of his body of work, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about what this guy can do if and when he becomes a head coach in the NFL. And it feels like he'll very likely be that guy either in this cycle or at least next year. He's currently 36, been a defensive coordinator in Baltimore for 2 years. He has local ties here in Atlanta because he was a student at Georgia, right? And what's fascinating about him, while he was still a student at Georgia, he was coaching at the local high school, Cedar Shoals High in Athens, as an assistant coach. And after graduating, he became a GA at Georgia, then a defensive quality control coach under Mark Richt back then. And saw a quote from Mark Richt about how, you know, it was easy to see him as this up-and-coming coach. He could, I quote, Mark Richt said, he can walk into any room and communicate with anybody, probably just about any subject, whether it's a real life subject or a football subject. And so after a couple of years at Georgia, he became an intern for the Ravens. And then after a few years, he kind of rose up the ranks to being a defensive backs coach by 2017, working under our guy, Dean Pease, when he was the defensive coordinator. Then Pease departed for Tennessee. Wink Martindale became the DC in Baltimore, and McDonald was promoted to linebackers coach. And then when Michigan had a DC opening, John Harbaugh told his brother Jim Harbaugh, hey, you got to check out this guy. McDonald became the DC for Michigan in 2021. That was the breakout year for Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, and Michigan's defense went from what was a really bad defense in that shortened COVID season to one of the best defenses in the country. And that was the first year that Michigan was a college football playoff, participant, as I recall. And then after that one season at Michigan, he came back to Baltimore to be their new DC once they dismissed Wink Martindale after the Ravens' own disastrous 2021 season, in part due to a lot of injuries and Wink not necessarily being able to adjust his blitz happy style to that sort of reality. And Baltimore's defensive rebound had been one of the best defenses in the league the last 2 years to being the best defense in the NFL this past season. And unfortunately, Cleveland, who was in the running to push them for that title, just got destroyed by the Houston Texans. We probably will see Baltimore go against Houston next weekend, assuming that the Bills win their playoff game this weekend. And so we'll see. So we can kind of contrast what Cleveland's defense looks like to Baltimore's defense. But that Baltimore defense has shut down a number of top offenses this year: San Francisco, Detroit, Miami. Maybe they'll add Houston to that sort of belt. But the style of McDonald's, he's less blitz happy than Wink Martindale was. They led the NFL in sacks this year with 60 sacks, despite only having the 25th blitz rate. In the kind of way that you got to think of, it's like Wink Martindale is like going in the knife drawer and he's just blitzing out the wazoo, right? And I don't think Baltimore they barely reached 40 sacks most of those years when Wink was the DC there. But Wink is just basically, he's going in knife drawer, he's throwing everything at the wall and something's going to stick. McDonald's that surgeon, right? He's that surgeon where like you're like, oh, why is the knife drawer opened up? And you're looking around, you don't see anybody, and then all of a sudden you got a knife sticking out your chest, and then McDonald just creeps up behind you and like, I pierced your heart. Like that's the type of surgeon he is. He's considered this up and coming, brilliant defensive mind. You look at the season Baltimore's defense had. Clowney had a breakout year. Roquan Smith, when he got there, like Roquan Smith was a good linebacker in Chicago, but he's become a great linebacker in Baltimore in part due to McDonald. You wonder, hey, maybe he can do that for Troy Anderson. Maybe, what he did at Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo in Michigan, he could do that for a young Arnold Ebiketie here in Atlanta. And so that's what, McDonald's bringing to the table. We talked about Raheem Morris's ability to communicate with young players. That's what McDonald is known for. Communication is key, and that's a critical part of why his defenses have been successful. And as I said, they've shut down many different offenses. They're adaptive. They transform week to week. They know how to sort of take apart these offenses, and we'll see what this Ravens defense does in the postseason. It's a big reason why a lot of people think this Ravens team is going to go all the way to the Super Bowl. So, I know a lot of people are very biased against hiring defensive-minded coaches. You wonder, and with all these defensive-minded coaches, if you hire these guys, you do wonder, okay, what is your vision for the offense? And that's going to be a challenge that Mike MacDonald is going to have to answer and overcome. Should he be the Falcons head coach? That's unknown at this point in time. But as far as a defensive rising star, like that's why I say he's like the McVay of defense. Like this is a guy that seems like, by all accounts, again, like I'm not sitting here as an expert or anything, but all the people that are generally smarter than me that know defensive football much more than me are all saying this is the guy, and it sort of is reminiscent of sort of how McVay sort of had that star. And so when people are like, hey, let's get Bill Belichick here, right? It's like, why get old Belichick when you can get young Belichick? Get the next Bill Belichick. What is he going to do, for the next 24 years? And I think that's what gets people excited about Mike MacDonald. So he is definitely one of the more intriguing candidates, but we'll see where he lands. As I mentioned, if Baltimore makes a run, that could challenge his ability to get a job. We'll talk about the timeline for not only the Falcons, but other teams in terms of how this coaching hiring cycle works. And we'll talk about, when we can expect the Falcons to make a hire, whether it's a Mike MacDonald or somebody else. And we'll talk about where the Falcons job ranks compared to the other 6 openings. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But first, guys, let's talk about GameTime, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, comedy, music, and theater near you. They got killer last-minute deals, which means you can buy tickets right up to the start of the event and sometimes even after. All-in prices means you can avoid those hidden fees. Views from your seat means you know exactly what to expect when you arrive, and their best price guaranteed means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, they will credit you 110% the difference. GameTime is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets, and all you got to do if you want to get in on this action, download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And guys, it's a new year. And, you might have a resolution to be more prepared in 2024 than you have been in the past. And there's nothing that you need to be more prepared for than, your health, right? It's flu season. I personally was just dealing with COVID after Christmas. And so you want to make sure you have access to the medications that you need should, sickness come your way. And especially when it comes to antibiotics, because there's recently been a shortage of antibiotics issued by the FDA. And Jace Medical is here to help you be more prepared. They have the Jace case. It's a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory, sinus infections, all that and more. Visit jacemedical.com and a board-certified physician will review what you need, and there will be a licensed pharmacy that will send you the medications at a fraction of the regular cost. It's more important than ever to be prepared today. Go to jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON and you'll get $20 off your order. That's JASE medical.com, promo code locked on for $20 off. So as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel so you can get all the biggest stories on all the leagues across the world in the country. And if you want more of that local flair, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well here on YouTube. So let's talk about the Falcons' overall coaching search and their timeline. We found out on Sunday morning that Antonio Pierce is the 10th coach to have requested for an interview. We know 4 have so far interviewed over the weekend. Mike MacDonald, as we mentioned on Friday, Brian Callahan, the Bengals offensive coordinator, and Steve Wilkes, the 49ers defensive coordinator, on Saturday. Anthony Weaver and the Ravens D-line coach, and Ejiro Evero, the Panthers defensive coordinator, are set to interview on Sunday. As I'm recording this, and as many of you are watching it, the Falcons are talking to those guys. And so we'll see, with some of these coaches that have teams playing this weekend, maybe we get an Antonio Pierce on Monday, right? Bobby Slowick, the first day that he could potentially have one of these interviews is Tuesday, the Texans offensive coordinator, coming off a very good game against the Cleveland Browns. And then the coaches, the teams that are playing on Sunday, those coaches, Aaron Glenn, the Lions DC, Ben Johnson, the Lions OC, and Raheem Morris, the Rams DC, they could interview as early as Wednesday, possibly Thursday. We'll see, if the Falcons set up formal interviews for Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh. But basically all of this to say is I would not expect the Falcons to hire a coach anytime soon. Not this week, maybe next week, but probably even after that point, because when you look at how the NFL has kind of structured how these things go, like these first set of interviews are all virtual over Zoom, all that sort of stuff. But then you can start to fly people into the building in Flowery Branch starting I think it's the week after. You can fly, like Bill Belichick and Jim Harbaugh, who are not currently employed by NFL teams right now. They can come to Flowery Branch, but these coaches that can start doing in-person interviews next week, right? If their teams get eliminated this weekend or next weekend, then they can come the week after the divisional playoff. And then you can't really hire guys until their teams are eliminated from the playoffs, which again hurts potentially someone like a Mike MacDonald if the Ravens go on a run. But all of this to say, like, the Falcons are probably not going to hire a coach anytime soon. I would be surprised if, say, like, just to put a random date on it, like if they have a head coach hire before January 24th, I would be surprised for that. It's more than likely that we won't see a hire for the Falcons until like the final week of January, maybe the first week of February, right? I saw a article that said the average time it takes for coaches now with how these rules are structured today is 26 days. So 26 days after the regular season this year would be February 2nd. That's the Friday before the Pro Bowl, right? That's the Friday I probably be on a plane coming back from Mobile from the Senior Bowl. So hopefully the Falcons won't hire a guy while I'm in the air, and I won't be able to react to it at that point in time. But for that reason, we're going to sort of take our time. Each day this week, my plan is to talk about at least one of these candidates per day, if not more per day. But again, we're talking 10 days, 2 weeks, possibly even 3 weeks before the Falcons wind up hiring coach. Again, maybe it happens before the conference championship games, but it seems like it's more likely to happen after the conference championship games. So, again, people relax, be patient. We'll see how this process plays out. So that's part of the reason why, like, some of these early reports, especially the Belichick stuff, I wouldn't pay that much attention to it. It's really when we get to that second round of interviews, potentially, where you start seeing people flying into Flowery Branch. That's when you should really start paying attention. That's when we'll start to get a better idea of who the Falcons are potentially targeting. But that being said, with that timeline stuff sort of out of the way, let's talk a little bit about sort of where this Falcons job ranks compared to the various other openings. And this comes from a question from Ricky Ricardo in the Locked On Falcons Discord, link in the description below. He says, where would you rank the current head coaching job openings? And so, this is my opinion. I'm sure plenty of you will have a slightly different opinion, and I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. Why you like this job over that job. I'm going to give you my reasons and my justification. Basically, I looked at all the 7 jobs and said, here are the pros and cons. This is how I would look at it if I was a coach, but I'm sure you guys have different opinions, and no need to get angry, because I know some of you guys, when someone has the audacity to say something that's slightly different from your opinion, why do you have the Falcons 1 spot lower than I have it, or 2 spots lower or higher than I have it? You're a terrible person. Like, relax, calm down, guys. Right. So here's my sort of thoughts on it. To me, the number 1 opening job is the Commanders, right? The pros, you have, I think, the most cap space in the NFL this offseason, new ownership, new GM, number 2 overall pick. So you're going to get that quarterback, right? Excellent skill position players. The cons are really just like, okay, you're probably going to have to rebuild the defense. You're going to have to, revamp the offensive line, maybe add 2 or so new starters. But with that cap space, with 4 day 2 picks, you're well on your way to solving those problems. That basically there's new energy in DC. And if I was a head coach, I would absolutely want to be part of it. Number 2 for me is the Chargers. And basically, it's the Justin Herbert effect, right? Their cap situation is pretty tough. They're probably going to be able, they're like 35 million over the cap projected right now, but they can clear that pretty easily, cutting some veteran dead weight. So they're going to take it on the chin from a dead money standpoint in 2024, but they'll be clear to go in 2025. So you're taking a step back from a cap standpoint in 2024, potentially taking 2 steps forward. And I'd like to take those 2 steps with Justin Herbert as opposed. The biggest con for the Chargers is ownership is not great. The Spanish family that owns the team is, reputed for not being the best ownership. I've heard they've made strides. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but like that was a big reason why the Manning family refused to have Eli play for them 20 years ago. There was recently a lawsuit. I don't know if that got resolved between the sister of the owner and her brother, or whatever the case may be. So there's some issues there with the Chargers that kind of bumps them down. But I do have the Falcons 3, mostly because they do not have a quarterback. That's the biggest con for the Falcons. They don't have a clear path to get that quarterback right now, but you do have a lot of young talent. This is a team that's a couple of pieces away from being a legit playoff contender. We'll talk more about the Falcons' path to getting a quarterback a little bit later, and I don't feel compelled to have to tell you guys what Atlanta brings to the table. You guys kind of know. So for me, 4 is Seattle. And mainly the pro of Seattle is like they feel like they're ready to compete right now for the playoffs. You can win now. They probably should have been a playoff team this year. They kind of underachieved there. But the cons are, long term, Geno can get you to the playoffs right now. Is Geno the guy that can win you a Super Bowl? You got to get that figured out. Their cap situation doesn't have as much flexibility as some of these other teams. And while I don't think they have bad ownership, you do have concerns about that because their former owner, Paul Allen, passed away in 2018. His sister sort of inherited the team, and she's just kind of mysterious, right? Like she hasn't done any interviews. I don't think she's done any press conferences, just like a couple of press releases since she took over 5 years ago. And so you just got like, who's the owner? Like, is it an absentee owner? That sort of thing. So that's a question mark for Seattle, knocking them down. 5, 6, and 7 to me, like it's really splitting hairs, and it's just personal preference. I have the Titans 5 simply because the Titans are kind of a complete rebuild. You just kind of come in that situation because John Robinson, the former GM, did such a terrible job the last 3 years. Like the cupboard from a talent standpoint is completely bare, but you just kind of go in there and we can just start completely fresh. And that's appealing to me. That may be less appealing to other folks. The Panthers, I have 6, mostly because of Bryce Young's presence there. You have some young defensive stars like Brian Burns, Derek Brown. You're going to have to pay those guys, but that's not a problem at this point in time. The cons for Carolina, you lack draft assets. You don't have great weapons. You got to figure that out. You got to rebuild the offensive line. And then, of course, ownership with David Tepper having a lot of concerns there. But I also think number 7, the Raiders, also have question marks about ownership. Like at least David Tepper wants to win. I feel like Mark Davis is just kind of like a man child that just inherited this team. And it's like, you have like, get out of here, man. Like I feel like I can come to accord with David Tepper. I'm just like, Dave, relax, my guy. We both want to win. Let me figure this out. With Mark Davis, I'm just like, no, get out of here, man. Like, and so the main reason I have the Raiders last is because like, they have their defense played outstanding in the second half of the season. You got Max Crosby, but I feel a little bit better about having Basically Bryce Young plus Brown and Burns is greater than Max Crosby and maybe one more year of Devontae Adams before he's adamant that he gets traded. Max Crosby's already, demanding trades if they don't hire Antonio Pierce, all that stuff. So the Raiders to me is kind of this nebulous. It's not a bad situation, but it's just like I don't know what the pros of the Raiders are. At least other teams have something going for them. They're just like, all right, I don't know. But that's sort of how I kind of see it. And we'll see if the Raiders, picking 13th, if they have a path to figure out their quarterback situation. We know the Falcons picking 8th are looking for that path to figure out the quarterback situation. And we'll break down we'll do a mini mock draft Monday, looking at the top 8 or so selections, some of the players that could go there, and sort of, do the Falcons have a path to getting a quarterback, or will they have to sort of settle for a pass rusher at the top of the draft? And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, it's a great time to check out the action at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. You got the playoffs going on. You got so many things going on with the NBA, NHL, so much and more. And right now, if you sign up, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. No, it's guaranteed, guys. You win, you lose, it's guaranteed to get $150 in bonus bets. You don't even have to win. Just bet $5 and boom, they're going to give you $150 in addition to bet. And so if you're thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. It's easy to use their app, right? You can bet, spreads, player props, over unders, right? Their parlay hub, right? You can find the more popular parlays, bet a little, win a lot. It's all available at FanDuel.com/locked on, and you can stay warm and cozy this winter. You can get in on that action. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. So as I said, this week we'll probably talk more about some of the coaching candidates, probably potentially talking about some of the other candidates that had interviewed over the weekend. We've already talked about Mike MacDonald, Anthony Weaver. Maybe we'll get into Brian Callahan, Steve Wilkes, Ajiro Evero, potentially on tomorrow's episode. So that is something that you can look in store as your first listen, potentially on tomorrow. So continue to make us your first listen on the Locked On Falcons podcast, your team every day. But let's get into a mini mock draft Monday, right? It's January 14th. We're just kind of laying the groundwork of some of the big topics and discussions and arguments and debates that we're going to have when it comes to the Falcons draft pick at this point in time. But nothing is set in stone. We're at the very beginning of this process, just like with the coaching hires. This is the beginning of the offseason, but just kind of want to lay a groundwork at least as I see things right now in January 14th. What are we looking at for the Falcons holding that 8th overall selection? And let's just go through the top 7 selections and sort of where I'm at with that. Top 2 selection, you got the Bears and Commanders picking 1 and 2. They're taking quarterbacks. Despite all the rumors and talk, that's just people, in my opinion, just looking to get clicks on their article, getting the comments going and whatnot. They're not trading out, right? We're not going to go too in depth on the Bears quarterback quandary. Again, that's a whole podcast. Check out Locked On Bears, as I'm sure they're talking about that each and every day over there. But I would be absolutely shocked if the Bears traded out the #1 pick. Basically, how I make that argument, Caleb Williams is arguably a once in a decade type of quarterback prospect, and you're going to pass that up so that you can go all in on Justin Fields, who's a below average starter in this league. You look at the various metrics, EPA, adjusted net yards per attempt. At best, he's the 19th best quarterback in the league, probably more likely to be the 26th best quarterback. Like you're not going all in on that guy. So, we can have a conversation about the Bears trading Fields to Atlanta. That's a whole conversation. I'm sure we'll have it at some point this offseason, maybe this week, in the future. We'll see. But the conversation of the Bears trading #1 to Atlanta, I just think you have to give up on that dream. It's the same conversation with Washington, assuming that Caleb Williams, the best bet to go #1 overall. They're going to be in a great position to get QB2. I think that's Drake May. I think there's a clear gap between Drake May. I think there's a clear gap between Williams. It's like Williams here, May, a little drop off there, and then a bigger drop off to Jaden Daniels. That's my personal opinion. But I think there will be a healthy debate on QB2 in this draft if Williams is the presumptive #1, and between Drake May of UNC and Jaden Daniels of LSU. As I've said before to other folks, right, I think Lamar and the Ravens going on a run is going to enhance Jaden Daniels' stock just because it's a copycat league. Lamar won the MVP. If the Ravens go to the Super Bowl, potentially win the Super Bowl, that's going to be a boost to Jaden Daniels because he's the best runner, emphasis on runner, that we've seen come into this draft since Lamar Jackson. And so I think that's going to be attractive to a lot of folks that are like, we want what Lamar is bringing to the table as well. And that may boost Jaden Daniels' stock. Drake May, the quick summary, very a little bit more volatile Justin Herbert, I think, is the best way to kind of describe Drake May, which, as I discussed earlier, is very attractive to me personally, given my high affinity for Justin Herbert. But I think it's a slam dunk that quarterbacks go 1 and 2. It's just a question of which ones go. To me, where the draft gets interesting is number 3, where New England has the pick. And it's likely that New England's going to take the third quarterback off the board, but New England's weird, right? Like, there's a chance that they may trade out. And this is where I think the Falcons have the best chance to go and trade up for a quarterback. I think that's going to be plan A for the Falcons this offseason, to try to get one of these 3 guys in May, Williams, or Daniels, really at that number 3, possibly that number 4 position, right? If I'm sitting here saying there's a 0.01% chance that the Bears trade out of 1, 0.02% chance that the Commanders trade out of number 2, maybe there's like a 7% chance, a 12% chance, 28% chance, who knows at this point, that New England trades out of 3, right? Or New England could stick and pick and say, hey, we love Mac Jones. We just need a playmaker like Marvin Harrison Jr., who some people think, right, is one of the best wide receiver prospects since Calvin Johnson. I'm not there yet just because I haven't done a deep dive, but based off of what I've seen, like, over the last 15 years, he's probably in the top 5 or 6 wide receiver prospects. Whether he's 1 or 2, like Calvin Johnson was, remains to be seen. But, you know, whether it's Mac Jones, maybe you get a Jacoby Brissett reunion in New England. Maybe they feel like, hey, we can plug and play. We just need weapons, because they have sorely lacked. Shout out to Bill Belichick for completely ruining that franchise the last couple of years. But they need a weapon like Marvin Harrison Jr. Maybe they take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3, and Arizona's sitting there at 4 going, hey, that was a guy who we were hoping to fall to 4, and now we're going to trade out. And that's where the Falcons can say, hey, let's go trade up. You know, you go back historically speaking, you look at past trades like this, you know, you had a trade, 8-4, right? You had a trade from 9-4 with Buffalo going up for Sammy Watkins in 2014. They gave up their first in that 2014 draft, their first in 2015, and I think a 4th in that 2014 draft. So maybe the Falcons give up this year's first, next year's first, and a 3rd. Or maybe they have to sweeten the pot a little bit more just because other teams are bidding for them. You get that quarterback premium, whatever the case may be. But that's maybe, to me, that's a little bit more realistic. Is it likely? No, I don't think it's likely at this point in time. But I feel like it's a much more realistic scenario for the Falcons to get their quarterback in this draft than going all the way up to 1 or 2 in this draft. So when we look at the rest of the top, 6 or 7 picks, right? Chargers pick 5, Giants pick 6, Titans pick 7. They're all kind of similar because it feels like they'll get wide receiver 2. Maybe that's LSU's Malik Neighbors. Maybe that's Washington's Rome Odunze. They'll get one of these offensive tackles. That's Notre Dame's Joe Alt, Penn State's Olu Fashanu. I feel like 3 out of those 4 guys will probably go 5, 6, and 7 in this draft based off of that. Of course, free agency could have impacted that, but there's good wide receivers, good tackles this free agency, but I don't know if there's anybody out there that's going to stop these teams from going after Neighbors or Dunze or Alt or Fashanu or whatever. And so that puts the Falcons at 8, feeling like maybe they can get the best defensive player in the draft. And my bet sitting here on January 14th, that may be Alabama's Dallas Turner. Again, it's early in the process. I'm a big Latu fan, the edge rusher from UCLA. He's supposed to be at the Senior Bowl, so I'm sure we will spend a lot of time talking about Latu. But Latu has some medical red flags. We'll probably go more in depth in that later in the month. And so I look at a player like Dallas Turner, who's probably a little less polished. Like Latu's a very technical pass rusher. That's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of him. But Turner, just in terms of pure traits, is sort of like kind of reminiscent to me, at least, and I've only studied like 2 games of his, but kind of reminiscent to me of like Brian Burns, Von Miller type of pass rusher in terms of what he brings to the table from an athletic standpoint, in terms of those 250-ish pound edges. Those are kind of the 2 premier athletes that have gone in the upper half of the first round over the last decade. I think Turner is also in that conversation. He's not as polished a pass rusher as I think those 2 guys were coming into the NFL, but he does have some polish to his pass rush. He likes to use that long arm. He likes to use his power. He needs some refinement with sort of his pass rush plan and all that sort of stuff. But from a trait standpoint, I think Dallas Turner is definitely a bona fide top 10 talent in this draft class. So if I'm making my bets right now, January 14th, as I'm recording this, the Falcons are either going to try to trade up to the 3 or 4 to get a quarterback, or they'll stick and pick and take someone like a Turner at 8. I'm sure my guy Jarvis Davis is going to be very happy about that. There are other options for the Falcons. If they want to go corner, I haven't studied these guys yet, but it sounds like Clemson's Nate Wiggins and Alabama's Terry and Arnold are going to duke it out for CB1. Maybe they go D tackle, right? Looking for a Grady Jarrett heir apparent. Jerzon Newton of Illinois is very reminiscent to Grady Jarrett based off of what little I've seen of him. Maybe it's another edge rusher instead of Latu, instead of Turner. Maybe it's Florida State's Jared Verse that they like a little bit more. Could they go offense? Could they go a quarterback? JJ McCarthy just declared for Michigan. He's going to be probably a lot more polarizing, but I think it's the strong bet to be QB4 over a Michael Penix, over a Bo Nix of Washington and Oregon, respectively. He's going to be very polarizing. I think Falcon fans are going to not be very happy about JJ McCarthy because I think the people that like him are going to be talking about his intangibles. And we just kind of went through that with Desmond Ridder, and their games are similar. And so I know Falcon fans probably not going to be willing to sign up for that, but we'll see how that all plays out. Maybe they go for a wide receiver. If one of the top 3 guys isn't there, wide receiver 4 is at LSU's Brian Thomas, FSU's Keon Coleman, Texas wide receiver A.D. Mitchell. Maybe. I don't see any of those guys quite yet as top 10 picks, but maybe we get to April and we'll have a different conversation. OT3, right? After Fashanu is at Alabama's J.C. Latham, Oregon State's Taliase Fuaga, or Georgia's Amarius Mims. Those seem to be the front runners. Maybe we get into that conversation where we're looking for the Jake Matthews heir apparent or an upgrade over Caleb McGarrett. All those are on the table right now, but if I was placing my bets, quarterback, trade up for a quarterback, or stick and pick and take Dallas Turner. So that's kind of where I'm at this point in the process, guys. We have 3+ months to talk about this and see how it develops, but just kind of laying the foundation for what I think the Falcons may do at the top of the draft. And again, you may have dreams of trading up to number 1 to get Caleb Williams. I think you just need to make peace with that not necessarily happen. But again, who knows at this point? The NFL always is surprising us, on a yearly, monthly, weekly basis. But that's it, guys. We'll be back with more coaching search conversations in the coming days. So continue to make us your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports today, Locked On Sports Atlanta 24/7 streaming channel if you want to get more insight into the playoff action as well as what's going on elsewhere in Atlanta sports. Locked On NFL will definitely have you covered for the playoff this wild card weekend. So check them out as your second listen, in addition to Locked On Falcons being your first listen. That's going to do it for us, guys. Really appreciate it. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.